I feel like culture is probably one of the biggest barriers to equality or equity that we have in any organisation, whether it be in gaming or outside of that. If the people at the top don't value what advocates value, then the people in key powerful positions aren't going to value that either, because they're the ones in charge of hiring the people in key powerful positions.
It's worth reminding ourselves of is that the bigger the choir, the louder the sound. And so even if these sorts of things are preaching to the converted, what they are doing is giving you that extra support. You are on the right track. We are here on this track with you. You might not have seen us. You might not know that we're walking this route together, but we're all going the same directions.
If people are in a position of power, then they're more likely to be moderate because they've got that power to lose. So trying to convince moderate people with power to do things from the outside is the way that you get this incredibly slow period of progress.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Gaming the System, the podcast where three intersectional feminists examine gaming and games through a feminist lens. I'm your host for today. I'm Jem, and I'm here with my friends Alex and Matt. So before we get started, if you want to support us, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/gaming the system for some exclusive content, or you can send us a one-off donation via PayPal to our email address, wearegamingthesystem@gmail.com.
On the 28th of January this year, they released an updated version of the Women in Games Manifesto, originally released in 2024. And we thought it would be good to have a look at where we are now and where we want to be going. This is quite timely for us as well, because we're coming into our 6th year of doing the podcast. So it's quite interesting to just take stock occasionally of where the industry is going and how we feel it is faring. To give you a little overview of where the Women in Games, kind of cutely named as WIG Manifesto, puts things. It's looking at the present realities and doing a deep dive into future systems. One of the key things that stood out to me, aside from its very funky lime green and suffragette purple colour scheme, is that they're flagging up that the industry workforce is only made up of 24 to 30% of women, despite the fact that we now know that at least 50% of gamers are women. There's a disparity there between the people that are making the games and the people that are consuming the games. One of the things that they've done in the manifesto is they've actually created a list of 14 reasons why things should be better, why we should be encouraging more women into the industry. They're all quite powerful. Number one is that women represent nearly half of all players, but remain under a third of the workforce. The imbalance, they say, is systemic, not inevitable. And I think it's quite interesting because, Matt, when we were talking with Tom last session, we talked about this idea that there's a sort of inevitability about things like capitalism and patriarchy and masculinity, that these things are just the way they are because that's the most sensible way for them to be, and how problematic that is and how incorrect and invalid that is. So Women in Games is obviously endeavouring to change these things. I'm just wondering whether there's any of these 14 points that jumped out at either of you.
I don't know much about this organisation. I don't know what their pedigree is and their history of wins is, because I think that if what they're doing is having tangible wins, then that's good. If I have misgivings about some of the stuff in this, then it doesn't matter, because if it works, then it does matter. I'm not entirely sure who this manifesto is for, because it feels a bit preaching to the choir, which is fine, but if we're on board for these things, we think it's a good idea, we trust that it's a good idea. And it feels like this kind of manifesto won't change people's minds, in the sense that if people who already agree with us read this, they're going to go, oh yeah, we agree with that. And it's impossible for a single document to convert people who don't agree. So that's putting too much pressure on it.
I can see what you mean, Matt. I'm on board with pretty much all of it. But again, I am the choir, like you say. I am already that needs to read it, is going to read it, because obviously people that already want this to happen and are actively trying to make it happen are reading it. But how do we get people who aren't ready to read? It's a bit like digital accessibility training. I've recently done some, and obviously I knew how important it was and why it mattered and why it was important. But in that actual training, I learned to make documents. And now I feel even more excited about accessibility. And I'm like, well, if I know how to do X, Y, and Z, I can tell other people how to do X, Y, and Z, because that's something new that I've learned. So maybe part of the spread is having something in there that not everyone will know about unless they're an expert. It's quite difficult to transfer that across, I guess, unless our practical in this manifesto. I haven't yet looked down that far because I've just had a chance to have a read, or like just small wins, even that you could do. I think really corporate. That you could do it into the IVIC. Or as an ally, again, equally. I think the more important thing is also as well, because it's all one thing saying you're an ally and you support having more women in the gaming sector, but like, what steps are you actually taking to help boost numbers, etc. I don't know if that makes sense to get other people to take it on board as well, who might not necessarily be thinking about it. But that is something I'm passionate about already, is just accessibility in general, in whatever form it takes. So, yeah.
It depends what the goal of the advocacy group is. So with, say, like disability accessibility training, you're teaching people how to make things accessible for disabled people. The goal of this manifesto should be having it more equitably split between genders. And that's a lot harder to implement, I think, just because there are so many hidden barriers. And if it was as simple as just implementing a few procedures, we'd be at 50-50 by now.
I had to bring about change, about it being a living guide, quote unquote. So it's got some points about it, that the manifest make other people. So it's got things like, there's one, so it's got highlights, toolkits, and learning resources. Don't go into detail about what those might be, but I feel like those things, particularly if you can get people who are passionate about it to know those like the back of their hand, then they'd be able to spread that across the teams and the departments and the organisations they work in on those. So yeah, that's, which is good.
If you've got culture and rules and laws, you can change the rules if you don't change the culture tends to win. Compared to 100 years ago, the women's rights have increased tremendously, but they're still facing unbelievable threats and danger and risks related to being female, because the laws say, oh, you can't sexually assault women, and yet it happens all the time, constantly, and it shows no sign of stopping because there is a culture that is not being changed.
I feel like culture is probably one of the biggest barriers to equality or equity that we have in any organisation, whether it be in gaming or outside of that. If the people at the top don't value what advocates value, then the people in key powerful positions aren't going to value that either, because they're the ones in charge of hiring the people in key powerful positions. And that's what dictates the culture that feeds down through the organisation. And if you have people with, let's say, perhaps more closed-minded views about particular sector, then it's going to shut people out, because those people are the ones who have the power and control to gatekeep. And I think we've talked a lot about the history of the gaming industry over the course of however many decades it's been in action. And I think that there is markedly less, or perhaps less, gatekeeping than there was when the industry was getting off the ground and expanding. But there is still some gatekeeping that exists, I think, today.
Laws without the power and institutional weight of actually enforcing them just makes them ineffectual. So when you've got men of a certain age who are in charge of a company, they still think that women shouldn't get management roles because they're going to get pregnant at some point. And the point of rules needs to be to force those people to not be allowed to make decisions from that point of view, because they'll be fined or prosecuted, or something like inevitable will happen to them as a result of doing it. They're not going to be able to get away with doing it. When women and minorities can be brushed aside at the whim of someone with power, then nothing is going to be like set in stone, because that's what I bang on about union stuff is all the time about, is that unless you are able to down tools and stop at a moment's notice a supermajority of workers, is so that when someone with power over you does something that you're not okay with, you stop there. And the problem with old boys clubs is they are built on looking down on and laughing and contempt for the average person. Like, if you look at the Conservatives, they jeer and shout and just smirk whenever they read something like this. If a woman stands up in Parliament and read that, they would be smirking and like chuckling to each other, because they have too much power and we don't have enough. And it's very easy to go from the outside and go, right, this isn't going to fix everything, which this definitely doesn't claim to do. And anyone who claims that they can fix everything single-handedly is wrong. The core thing for me for this, and for most organisations, is to see their position on LGBT people, specifically trans women and girls, because that is the tip of the spear point where all the focus, the really roiling LGBT like pressure comes down upon. Because as gay people and lesbians and bisexual people have been able to like be seen in society and accepted in society more, the right wing has its death grip jaws on trans women. So as long as an organisation like this has said that they support women and girls and gender diverse people, then they get a big tick in the box for that, because It doesn't matter how much good you do for women, if you say, but not those ones. It needs to be coming from a place of just, right, first things first, we're going to get out of the way that we support trans women. Trans women are women, trans girls are girls. They are part of our team. We want to see them elevated alongside us. And as long as someone puts that there first, they're going to be fighting the good fight. I think we could trust that that's what they're going to be doing in their way.
They've been around since 2009. And at that point, women only made up 6% of the games industry. Obviously, they're not claiming that they're responsible for the increase. But their main aim is to approach the issue from the perspective of policy, education, industry and community. So they recognise what you've both been saying, the importance of policy and culture change and community change. And they're doing that through improving education around this topic. So that would be what this manifesto is primarily down to do. I agree with you. I think that as with all these things, it's always challenging to make sure that the right people read these things. And we know that the people that have the power are often the ones who are not interested in this sort of information, either because they think they already know it all or because it directly opposes how they see the world. So there is definitely a question as to who are they speaking to in this document. They have created the Women in Games Guide, Building a Fair Playing Field, and that does have ways to address the issues that they're raising in this manifesto. So practical ways to encourage companies to recognise the value of diversity and inclusion and to point them in the right direction of who they can talk to get more practical support on that. And that's one of the things that they're doing with their ambassador system. I've come across them periodically in the time that I've been working on the podcast. I don't see them a lot out there, but I know that they are doing things. And I'm hoping that they are working behind the scenes within the industry to promote these issues. I think both of you have raised so many important points about this topic. And I suppose what I'm interested in is how can organisations like this get a foot in the door within the industry? I suppose if we look at it as, say, in 2009, it was 6%, and now let's say it's 30%. It's not exactly quick. There's been quite a lot of changes in the industry and in the world in that time. And obviously, yes, it is moving in the right direction, but it's not going at any kind of the rate that it needs to be moving at. What can people be doing to move this dial a little faster?
I'm going to jump in and share a quote. It's one of my favourite quotes. And I think it's worth reiterating and reminding ourselves, because with any advocacy, it's really easy to think this isn't happening fast enough. It needs to be here now. And it's a quote from Judy Heumann. She's a disability rights activist who passed away a few years ago. She wrote about disability rights, but it does apply across any kind of advocacy. Change never happens at the pace we think it should. It happens over years of people joining together, strategizing, sharing, and pulling all the levers they possibly can. Gradually, excruciatingly slowly, things start to happen. And then suddenly, seemingly out of the blue, something will tip. I think it's worth reiterating that quote because I really like it. But it also is a good reminder that the work that everyone is doing is valuable and is making change. It's just very slow. And it's frustrating, but it is happening. But to answer the question of how the manifesto can get a foothold in these organisations, that's a tricky one. But I think it is, like Judy says, it's about pulling all the levers and just getting people who care about it to put themselves out there as much as possible. I guess there's a lot of networking, a lot of that sort of thing, a lot of events, a lot of working for free, probably, It's not easy. I know that much.
I think that's a really, really useful quote. And as you say, it's well worth reminding ourselves about that. I think we live in a time where everything happens so quickly, especially the news cycle is just moving quick. And social media hasn't helped that, this idea that things are happening now, and you're moving on to the next story. But the big things, social change, policy change, industry change, they do happen slowly. So sort of societal attitudes takes a very long time to change. And in some cases, you're talking generations. Matt, you said earlier, men of a certain age are cautious of employing women in too high up roles because they're worried they're going to go off and have babies. That's because of their generational experiences. And it does take time for these attitudes to shift, especially when people are quite comfortable in the status quo and therefore don't see much reason to motivate that. And I think that one other thing that it's worth reminding ourselves of is that the bigger the choir, the louder the sound. And so even if these sorts of things are preaching to the converted, what they are doing is giving you that extra support. You are on the right track. We are here on this track with you. You might not have seen us. You might not know that we're walking this route together, but we're all going the same direction. So keep on with it. And I think as a feminist podcast that is championing equality and diversity, it's good for us to know that there are other people out there who are also championing diversity and equality in games, because sometimes it's quite lonely and sometimes you feel like you need a little bit of encouragement. Are we the only ones who are shouting about this?
Yeah.
Because, that it can feel like that. And I think at this time, perhaps more than ever before, we need to band together. We need community. So sometimes it's okay if actually all these documents are doing is talking to the converted within the community and saying, yeah, we're working on this and this is the right way to go. And so I think there is value in that, even if it doesn't get in front of policymakers. It might get in front of people who can get in front of policymakers and people who can maybe become policymakers. So
a very big obstacle that the left wing and most progressive people in society have is that we have never been in complete power ever. Whereas every form of advocating for things and organising for things in our country and in America as well, definitely, is the only thing that has the most chance of working is organised labour. But that has been able to be completely suppressed as a concept taught to people and leaves us with we'll have to follow the institutional route. We'll have to go through government or through the courts or the media, when those are all the tools of the institution. And they're about convincing the people with power to support, to do the things that you want them to do. But then, because we've only ever not had power. Whereas the right wing and the ruling class, they have had that absolute power and had it for long periods of time, where they are the people on the inside doing the things that they want. And what the goal of activism should be is to get society to the reality that they want faster than it happening organically. And our quote that I like from Martin Luther King is that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizens' councillor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice. And if people are in a position of power, then they're more likely to be moderate because they've got that power to lose. So trying to convince moderate people with power to do things from the outside is the way that you get this incredibly slow period of progress as it becomes just naturally and organically more. So that's like like the internet really like booming towards the end of the 2000s has cracked open the world of representation, and when children can see like representations of themselves in places where that just didn't exist before, then they're going to expand out into the world more because they can see it. But then with stuff like Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement and, say, gay rights movement, is that there were a point in history in our country in America where being gay was illegal. It was literally against the law. Whereas now there was a point where campaigners managed to stop it being illegal, and it hasn't gotten completely rid of homophobia, but we are infinitely far better forward for that. And with the civil rights movements in America, the campaigners managed to get the civil rights bill passed, and that ended segregation. And then you come to today, and then no one bats an eyelid. Well, most people don't bat an eyelid at the integration of society, because the people who do go, oh, well, we shouldn't be integrated, they don't have power anymore. And the people with power believe in integration. You need to have a big win, a big permanent win on the record to allow your future to happen faster. Because if the Civil Rights Bill hadn't been passed and being gay hadn't been made illegal, then we would be so much further back. We need to be hunting for those big permanent wins. And we just don't, we have not been taught how to imagine things in that term. Because one thing I want is a women's strike. There are 50% of the country are women. All women go on strike for a month. Don't do everything that you would normally do for a month, and the country would collapse. Because it is built on, apart from women being a much bigger part of the workforce now, all the care work that women do as well. If women went, right, go on strike for a month and not do anything, nothing could be done to force women back to doing things. There isn't anything that can be done because it's 50%. That's the big win that I can imagine. In order to have the change, the utopian future that we want, we need to be winning now. If we win now, then 10 years down the line, we'll be in a better place to win again. And going forward like that. There's a reason it's so hard to do, because it's fucking difficult to do. And the patriarchy and the capitalist ruling classes have all the power. They have all the institutional power and all the tangible resources. So we're not just going, oh, it's the free market of ideas where everyone comes together and makes their argument, and then the one with the best argument wins. No, we are being suppressed and just crushed down into wanting to give up. And it's just exhausting. That's exhausting.
I think this is one of the reasons why it's good to have these kind of manifestos come out, because it reminds us that other people are working for these things, that there are organisations who are not for profit, who are doing their best to nudge things along. But I agree that what we need is a sort of big aha moment. And I'm interested as to whether AI might provide that. And so in our next episode, we will actually go down that and explore that route and see whether AI could provide a solution to some of these issues and whether women are being included in that space as well as the games industry as a whole. I'd like to thank you both for this episode, and we'll see you very soon. You can find us every Thursday, and you can also check out our back catalogue of many topics. We've talked about almost everything, I think, in this area. So do check out previous episodes, and we will speak to you very soon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of Gaming the System. If you want to support us, you can donate to us through our PayPal by sending it to wearegamingthesystem@gmail.com if you want to send us a one-off donation. If you want to donate to us monthly, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/gamingthesystem. Until next time, bye-bye.